Welcome back to the workshop. In my last video, I talked about my various back saws, but I didn't use them with my bench hooks, which is how I actually use them most of the time in the shop. You may have seen bench hooks. They're sort of these long things with curved ends, or maybe they used them in the 18th century. The ones I have here are very simple. So I'll talk about what I have, the different ones that I have, their uses, and how you can easily make one yourself. So first of all, the bench hooks that I have, they're just square piece of wood. It's either, this one's plywood, sometimes pine. The first one I used or made was made of pine, and then I have a strip of pine on the bottom and a strip of pine on the top. But of course it's interchangeable, so the top can become the bottom and so forth and so on. Usually what I do is I have one long strip and one shorter strip, and the shorter strip is the one that I'll use for cutting or for sawing. So taking the bottom strip, putting it against your workbench or table or whatever you're using, then you take your piece of wood and you put it against the fence of the top. This area over here is where you can saw. Just line it up and go to work. And it's just that easy. And you could do different things. You could use it for sawing. This one was actually originally made for mitering, and I had different angles, but that piece of wood eventually broke apart, and I got rid of it and replaced it. But you could do chiseling work or something. If you had a piece of wood and you wanted to do some chiseling work, you could definitely do that. Because as you're pushing this in and pushing this in, so as you're pushing the hook into the bench, there shouldn't be too much jumping around. And so anybody could do this, whether they have a workbench or not. In fact, I used this type of solution before I even built this. I just had this blue table built into the wall at the house I was at before, and was able to use this with that. But if you do have a face vise, then of course you can just put your piece into the face vise. Now the vise is holding this in place, so really all you have to pay attention to is holding your piece of wood in place when you saw or chisel or whatever it is you're doing. So as I said, I have different ones that I've made, and I said this is the second one that I made. I made another one, but as you work with this, as you do sawing, the saw kerf will wear down over time to the point that this piece will just break off. Even if you use, let's say, on a different side, let's say you use sawing both sides, it's still going to be the same piece of wood or the same area, and so it's disposable. And so you don't want to make this out of oak if you don't need to. I mean, if that's your interest, then fine. But again, piece of plywood. This is one that I made. If you had seen my Woodworking 101 video, you know that I was at Colonial Williamsburg. That's where I trained in conservation, but also some of my woodworking. A lot of my woodworking basics came from there, working with the conservators. I went there in 2016 for a little training. I was doing some frame work, getting ready to do some frame conservation, and I wanted to get a little extra experience. And so while I was there, I had to do some carving with a chisel, and I didn't bring my bench hook with me. And so I said, hey, do you have a bench hook? And they couldn't find it. So I went ahead and made one. And so this is made out of a nice plywood material with, again, just scrap pine on either end and screwed in. And it's okay to screw these things in. Usually what I would do is I would put glue down and then screw it in, but because they have a full machine shop up there, I don't have a full machine shop here, but they had a full machine shop. I was able to cut the wood to square on a table saw and then tap the holes for the screws with a drill press. And so, so this is actually a much nicer version. And since being there in 2016, I had since used this at Tryon Palace with my conservation work. Kept this in my bag because there were a lot of times that I would need to do something. In fact, I kept it in my bag, but I also kept it in my portable tote, the big one that I made. If you had seen that video from when I first started the channel. There was this huge tote that I made that I could actually stick this in the tote, like on the top surface, and do work on it out in the historic houses, in the museums, in the galleries. I didn't have my workbench with me, but having this, I was able to saw, chisel, make shims for furniture. I was able to do so much stuff. So, but when I moved here to Knoxville, I brought it with me. And then the third one that I have, this is one that I made way back when I started. And I kind of did a different approach. This is, again, a piece of scrap pine, nasty scrap pine, piece of pine on the bottom, piece of pine on the top. But this pine on the top is actually removable. And so the idea was that I drilled some holes in it. So holes at different lengths, so that instead of having a set length of about 6 inches or so, I could go much longer. So if I had a longer board, I could come out pretty far, or I could be pretty close. To be honest with you, this has been used maybe a couple times, and it's mainly been used at the far end. I have not used it at, say, this end or this end, but for the most part, if I'm working with a big piece of wood, this comes in great help. And this is just held in place by, these are dowels, wooden dowels, that were glued into here, into the piece. So it is not screwed in like the other ones are. So as far as making one of these for yourself, it's pretty simple. Again, you just get a piece of wood, scrap plywood, scrap pine. I mean, if you want to use oak, that's great. It would be very strong and very heavy, but any wood will do. Just make it into a square as best you can. But this would have been cut probably with a circular saw. I had a circular saw back then. It doesn't matter. So piece of wood, the length would be the length of the piece. And then for this one, you would just, figure out how long you want it and cut it off and then glue it on. I would advise that you glue and screw these things if you're going to do it. Now there's a difference. This one, the pieces are glued down and screwed from underneath. The issue there could be that these screw heads could mar your table surface. So if you're doing this on your dining table instead of a workbench, keep that in mind. But it still works. This one, of course, the screws were from the top, and that's probably the preferred way to do it. You could do it either way. The main thing is that you do want to use screws, because if it's glue alone and you're doing a bunch of pushing on it, I mean, you're not putting a tremendous amount of force on it, but over time, using these for years, I mean, this one was made in 2016, and I'm going to guess this was made in 2015, and all the stuff that I've made in this workshop, the workshop in North Carolina and the workshop here, they've had a lot of use. And so I would suppose that they could break off very easily, and so the screws are really there to reinforce them in place. So these are the bench hooks that I had that I've made over the years. They're very versatile for what I do in my workshop, in the small workshop, using with a workbench or a portable workbench or a table or whatever. I've even had one of these set up on a bookcase one time, and again, I have used it with a tote, a bigger, much larger tote, and works very well. We had some of these at my workplace, and I have used them on stair steps, on wooden stair steps. I have hooked this in to do sawing on site before I had that large tote. So they're very versatile, and they can be used in a lot of situations. So consider making one of these for your shop. I think you'll be happy with what you come up with, and it might help you in your woodworking. Thanks so much for watching.